Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. During this session, please feel free to ask any questions throughout this time. We will respond in the Q&A window or during the live Q&A period at the end of the presentation. If we do not get to your question, please feel free to follow up with presenters by clicking on the tile on your screen or connecting with them on LinkedIn. So this is the Asian, Desi, and Pacific Islander Professionals in GIS SIG. Welcome. Thank you for joining us. So starting off here, we really encourage you to check out the other SIGs that are going on after this. There is Homecoming, which is an event North Star is hosting for Blacks in GIS. It's going to be a great event. Definitely recommend checking that out from 3:30 to 4:30 Pacific. Other SIG recordings that are definitely worth checking out would be Out in GIS, GIS for Equity and Social Justice, Clado, using GIS to operationalize racial equity and social justice, and the Esri Accessibility SIG. So starting things off here, this session is hosted by Esri's Asian, Desi, and Pacific Islander Network, which is an employee resource group at Esri. We are a grassroots organization that is dedicated to supporting people from the Asian, Desi, or Pacific Islander diaspora, both at Esri and within our local communities. We are committed to volunteering and dedicating resources towards supporting all communities that have been historically marginalized, and we seek to amplify diverse perspectives and experiences in the GIS space and beyond. So please feel free to scan this QR code if you want to learn more. It'll link you out to a story map we've made that just goes in a little more depth about this. But yeah, from here, during this session, you will hear about the lived experiences from Asian, Desi, and Pacific Islander professionals, learn about what their career paths have looked like, and then also hear about the work that they're doing in the GIS space to support their local communities. So this panel today will start off with introductions. Then we're going to have an open conversation around some key topics and key issues that are really relevant to our communities. And then we will move on into the Q&A session. So starting off here, to introduce ourselves, we are starting with the question, how would you describe your origin story? So just kicking things off here, my name is Chloe Tereslina. My pronouns are she, her, and I will be moderating this panel today. I am a Chinese American adoptee and I'm from Colorado. I'm very passionate about advocating for historically marginalized groups and really supporting the communities in the East Los Angeles area. Right now, I currently work as a business analyst at Esri, and I additionally help support my company's racial equity team in my free time. I'm a co-founder of the Asian, Desi, and Pacific Islander Employee Resource Group at Esri, where we really focus on increasing that representation and opportunities that ADPI people get in the workplace. And in my free time, I enjoy hiking with my dog, and I'm studying to become a tea master.
Hi, good afternoon, everybody. My name is Chris Bhang. I use he, him pronouns. I'm a proud Japanese Korean American, born and raised in Seattle, Washington. I started my post-college life running away to Chicago to be a hippie. I taught high school science and video production for several years. And then I became an attorney and I practiced immigration law, defending folks from deportation and removal. And now I am a government drone and the cog in the wheel of big government. Just kidding, I do love my work. I'm currently the Civil Rights Manager for King County, the Office of Equity and Social Justice. I enforce civil rights laws at the county in employment, housing, contracting, and places of public accommodation. I also work on developing just and racial equitable policies at the county. In my free time, I enjoy sci-fi and hanging out with my dogs and my wife. Big thanks to you, Chloe, Ari, Will, and the folks here at Esri for inviting me to be here today. Looking forward to the conversation.
Thanks, Chris. Sung?
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Sung Cho, he, him. Born and raised in South Korea, immigrated here in the 1990s. Worked professionally as a social worker, helping young adults get connected to education and work opportunities, and also a program manager supporting employment programs for people with disabilities. Currently, I am supporting the Coalition Against Hate and Bias along with Chris Bhang. It's a community-led effort to bring attention to the hate crimes in our region and bring BIPOC communities together to impact policy and resources and educate our communities about institutional racism, anti-Blackness, and Native erasure. I'm honored to be here and share this great work of the community with you. I have also been the co-chair of the API affinity group that was started in King County. Thank you.
Thank you, Sung.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for having me. I'm Nurasih. My pronouns are she, her. I'm a product designer at Esri, an urban planning grad student at Portland State University. I live here in Portland, Oregon with my husband and a bull terrier. I'm here to offer my perspective and experience as Indonesian, Muslim, immigrant woman, and how I support social justice efforts at my work and in my community. Most importantly, I'm here to learn from other speakers and from this discussion.
Thank you, Ade. Well,
Hey everyone, my name is Braganza. I was born in Jacksonville, Florida, but I grew up all over California, Japan, and Germany because my parents were both in the military. I am Filipino American, and I'm really passionate about learning about topics that affect the Asian American community, both professionally and within our society at large. For my day job, I'm a technical account manager here at Esri, where I support our federal customers with their tech support questions and issues. And I'm also one of the co-chairs for the Asian Desi and Pacific Islander employee resource group here at Esri, where we try to make space for and network with other ADPI professionals within our company. A little bit personal about me. I like to video call my dog in my spare time. I like to do yoga, and I like to try new restaurants. And while my experience isn't as varied and as lengthy as others, I do want to share my experience because when I was starting my career, there are not a lot of other Filipino or Asian faces that I saw at work. So hopefully others with similar experience as me can feel some sense of comfort or solidarity.
thank you for those introductions, everyone. I think that gives some good orientation to the places you all are coming from for this conversation here today. Starting things off here with our first question. What was your experience like navigating American culture as an Asian, Desi, or Pacific Islander person?
Right. So I'm going to start off. I think I'll answer this question by saying it was kind of this journey of figuring out that it's not just navigating culture, but expanding my understanding of what American culture was. And I'll talk a little bit more about that in a second. I grew up with my grandparents on my Japanese side, and my grandfather chose not to speak Japanese at the household. He encouraged me to fit in and not rock the boat. Definite Japanese values. Not to make problems and to endure hardships without complaint. He was an interned Japanese person during World War II, sent to one of the camps in California, and he had internalized this need to fit in. And I also later in life kind of figured that out too. And I remember bringing nori or seaweed to school one day for lunch, and it's super popular now. Apparently, you can get it at Trader Joe's, but back then everyone's like, "What is that?" And I got the nickname Sushi Brain for the rest of the school year. And so I quickly understood the need to fit in because American culture will reject you. But as I grew into myself and learned more about American society and culture and what it really means, is that I don't think you can ever define American culture as just one thing or experience, because I am the American experience. Everybody here is the American experience, and American culture cannot be defined as one experience, right? And so what my previous understanding of what navigating around has now turned into, how do I demonstrate and really live my life fully, understanding that I belong here just as much as anyone else, and my story is as American as anyone else. And this idea that I didn't belong and that what American culture was something other than me is a consequence of white supremacy. And I think that's something we're going to be talking about a little bit more in this discussion. And I just want to take a quick moment to say what we mean when we talk about white supremacy. And we're not talking about the KKK or burning crosses or overt, acts of racism and hate. That certainly is a manifestation of it, but white supremacy is best understood as historically ingrained systems of privilege that had purposely disadvantaged communities of color. And this is not a dig at white folks, but acknowledgement that our nation was founded through genocidal colonialism and slave labor. Those are just truths. And as our nation grew and as our laws development, even the fabric of society was created to protect these founders, right? Not acknowledging Black folks as all human, not giving the right to vote to anybody except for property-owning white men, right? Forced treaties that took away indigenous land, redlining to exclude home ownership by POC communities, Jim Crow laws, exclusionary immigration laws, like all these things work together to the benefit of the white majority to the detriment of people of color. And there's still effects today that exist in law, systems of government, institutions, and social norms that value the lives of people of color less than a white majority. And that's what we're talking about when we're talking about white supremacy. Lengthy answer.
Thanks, Chris.
Yeah, thanks, Chris. For me, I immigrated here with my parents in the 1990s, and it was a huge leap of faith into the unknown. And, my parents sold everything and left everything behind. And, it wasn't an easy childhood. It was, I was very different, and people let me know that. And trying to fit in and assimilate and learning it about American culture through rap music. And, some of my favorite shows were like Def Comedy Jam and Living Color. But, being ashamed of my own culture and making me feel like I didn't belong, being shamed of being able to speak a different language, being ashamed of my food, my culture and heritage, until I learned more about why that was, why we are made to feel that way, and why we're always othered and different. I learned that through Asian ethnic studies in college, and I wanted to learn more about my own culture and heritage. And now it's really interesting to see things that I was kind of ashamed of be in mainstream, such as like kimchi. It's being spoken about by famous chefs and its beneficial aspects of it, and K-pop being sang by these white children, and watching K-drama, and even Netflix is producing their own original K-drama series. Having more of an understanding of Asian American experience and how Asian Pacific Islander Desi people were viewed in the U.S. Helped open my eyes to how so much of our daily lives are impacted by white supremacy and very white centric. Navigating American culture as a Korean American, we are often complimented and say, wow, you speak English so good. And often questioned, like, where are you from? Where are your great grandparents from? And, Chris was born here in multi-generation here, but he will still get, well, where are you really from? Where's your great grandparents from? To try to get to the point of what your ethnic heritage is. But we rarely, if ever, ask our white counterparts where they are from and where their great grandparents are from. Also, our food, our cultural food is viewed stinky and intolerable, but there's a lot of other stinky cheeses and foods from other cultures that are not necessarily East or Southeast Asian. Find it interesting that accents are viewed as intolerable, and nobody has the patience to try to understand an Asian accent, but like a British accent, French, Italian accent is seen as smart. You're smart, and wow, it's a sexy, romantic accent. And that's all white supremacy working its way through our psyche and building this like multi-generation of society. Yeah.
Thanks so much for sharing your stories, and I relate so much with both of your stories. I grew up in Indonesia watching syndicated American movies and TV shows, and I really thought that I understood the American culture. But that when I got here, I realized that I'm a foreigner that wasn't represented in those movies and the shows that I watch, right? And also it's a multi-layer experience for me when I got here. I'm a foreigner to Asian American. Asians who were born in America would in the US would refer to me as fob, or fresh off the boat. Um, and even more foreign to white Americans. In high school, for example, I went by a different name that was suggested to me because it was easier to pronounce than my real name. And I've been told not to present because no one would understand my accent. And there were other examples of like microaggressions that I experienced throughout the years that just kind of build up. But after 9/11, in fear of backlash against Muslim, I really try to hide my Muslim identity. I just made sure to be like the first to condemn any like acts of terrorism as if I was responsible for them, right? And I tried hard to distance myself from my own community. And later I learned this is all, one characteristic of white supremacy, and that is to erase my identity in order to blend in and get closer to whiteness, in order to be accepted. So to cope, I turned to books and made the library as a safe space for me. But I'm sharing this story not for a pity party, and definitely not to be in an oppression Olympic that sometimes I see conversations like this can quickly turn into. But because throughout the years I learned that my story isn't unique to me, just like what we heard today. And when I learned that, it really gave me a sense of belonging, and it helped me turn my experience into a motivation to connect with and help others like me.
Thanks, Ade. Really appreciate that. Yeah, I had a lot of similar experiences to my other fellow panelists. A little bit different though. Growing up as Filipino American, I was born in Jacksonville, Florida, like I'd mentioned, and there weren't a lot of other Asian, let alone Filipino families in the area. If there were other Asians, they were just Filipino people that we had known, either friends or family members. And growing up, I didn't even identify. I mean, when I was very, very young, like 5 or 6, right? I did not even identify as Asian. I knew I wasn't white. I knew I wasn't black. I knew I wasn't Puerto Rican. But I thought we were just some other space. And it wasn't until I was much older, like middle school and high school, and even up until college, where I started to identify more with this pan-Asian American heritage. Like the other panelists had mentioned, I did also spend some of my time running away from my family's culture and who I am. And it was that way because, as a Filipino American, you're kind of caught in the middle. You are quote unquote too American to really be Filipino. My relatives would always tell me, we don't even speak the language, you would barely eat the food. But to my non-Filipino classmates, I was too Filipino to be American. Much like Sung, people would always ask us, where are you really from? I remember I used to like to collect foreign currency as a kid. That was my hobby. A little strange, but that was my hobby. And one time I pulled it out at a mall because my American dollars were there too. I was going to pay for like ice cream or something. And I remember the gentleman that I was handing my money to said, "Oh, is that money from the old country?" And then he wouldn't really accept the fact that I was saying, "No, this is just my hobby. I just like to collect money like this." And as far as navigating American culture, I found a lot of, I guess, acceptance with other children of immigrants who were really into hip hop. Sung was talking about what we were practicing, how he's also into that as well. And I remember just being really into the music and the fashion and all that, and it being a way for me to be unique, but also also blend in with American society, because, you know, growing up, we didn't want to be labeled as fob. I understand as an adult now that's incredibly rude and offensive, but as a child, we didn't want to be labeled that way. So that was our way to be not white, but also still fit in, if that makes sense. And I guess to ask the other panelists, how Sung had mentioned earlier that there is a little bit more acceptance now, such as kimchi and K-pop being more popular in America. I was wondering if you all thought that the acceptance is, I guess, more real, for lack of a better term, or if it's not quite where you'd like it to be. My fiance is a school teacher, and her students, they all like to sing K-pop, and they're all different races and ethnicities. They love to sing K-pop, like BTS and Blackpink. But I feel like these portions of Asian and Asian American culture and heritage that are being accepted are just the palatable parts of our culture. We've seen with this past year with the rise in hate crimes that while people may think, oh, well, the stereotypes of Asian people are very innocent, well, in reality, as soon as something such as the pandemic happens, we are quickly othered and we are quickly turned into the foreigner. So I wanted to know what other people thought as well.
Thanks, Will. I just want to touch on something that resonates with me so much is the fact that how many times I've heard that I am not American enough, but then, you know, the Koreans are like, oh, you're way too American for us. You're not fully Korean. And you feel like, or I feel like I don't quite belong in either space fully, right? But I am the 2.0 version of a Korean American, and I am fully Korean and American. And, you know, even my mom's guilty of this, where she's like, oh my gosh, Koreans don't do that. And I'm like, well, you're going to see a Korean do it because I'm Korean. So, yeah, that resonates with me so much.
Thank you, everyone, for sharing your experiences on this question. I know we could talk about this all day because the pressure to assimilate is just so loud for us pretty much all the time, especially over the last year, definitely in reference to a lot of the hate crimes that spiked. Yeah, I know we could talk about this for a minute, but we do have to move to the next question, which is, you know, a big one too, which is, do you believe that obstacles like the model minority myth, the idea of the perpetual foreigner, casteism, etc., have impacted you or your career? And if so, how? So I do think a lot of the conversation we just started does segue nicely into this. So I'll pass it off to Chris to jump into this one.
Yeah, absolutely. And thanks so much, anyone, for what you shared. And it does fit in really nicely. So just a quick thing about perpetual foreigner, right? Sung had mentioned earlier that I'm a later generation Asian American to this country, but actually on my Korean side, to this continent, we're fifth generation. So we moved here a long time ago. But does that really matter when you look at me? I don't think anybody watching this will say, oh yeah, that guy has been here longer than my family. Or, I mean, because our idea of who American is you don't look like me, right? And that's what it is assumed by a perpetual foreigner. And that's why people can still compliment me on my excellent English, which is excellent, but they don't need to do that. And this fits in really well to what you were both talking about earlier in the need to fit in and how dangerous that is. And the very idea that you can fit in, because we're swimming in this world of white supremacy, that even though you're the perpetual foreigner, you can still fit in. And then we can, you know, don this idea of being the model minority. We're good at math. You know, we raised ourselves up pulled up our own bootstraps, and we made it in this country. But, you know, as soon as something like 9/11 happens, all Muslims are scapegoated. Everybody, the Sikh community was targeted, even though they're not Muslim, right? During COVID, all of a sudden, people that look like me are considered dangerous and dirty. But that was not the myth that was perpetuated before, right? And so that's what it means, but to be a perpetual foreigner, like even if you think you can fit in, the minute that a white majority or the majority of this country sees that you are or could be a threat, that those privileges quickly melt away. Did want to talk about, yeah, this definitely does impact my role at work. And I think, and this is a value-free statement, right? But some folks have never met an Asian person. And I think there's folks here who can identify as being the first Asian friend to somebody. And that's not bad, right? But if you don't have like existing relationships with people of different cultures, or people that look like me, your understanding of them might be based purely on what you've seen on television or read in books or movies, or that is displayed in popular culture. That's just kind of the way our psyches work, but that has a really detrimental effect to folks like me, right? So if you've never met an Asian guy, you'd be like, oh, math, he's super asexualized. He's not going to be aggressive. He might know Kung Fu and can help me fix my Macintosh. Not great when you're trying to talk about racial-based policies in high stakes meetings, right? And I will show up in ways that people don't expect and maybe not want me to show up. And because I have not fit into this idea of a docile, submissive Asian man, for which they have assumed about me, probably through the media.
Yeah, thanks, Chris. Yeah, you know, the model minority myth hurts us all. You know, some Asians, some East Asians will get cozy with that and say, yeah, see, we're doing well, and snuggle up to white supremacy and try to distance themselves from other POC. But what we've seen in the last year is that as soon as it's inconvenient, that we will be othered and tossed and cast aside. It's really used to divide people of color, and it really hides the fact that there's significant need in all of our communities, but especially Asian Pacific Islander. When you group that data together, it hides the policies and the need for resources for our community. You know, some of our Southeast Asian communities in our region are some of the most, lowest, highest level of poverty, lowest level of high school graduation. But then you lump everyone together with like the tech workers, and you're going to say, oh, these Asians are doing so well. They're doing the best out of all these POC. And that it really hides the need, and it's like detrimental and harmful to the community. I believe it also has, you know, probably negatively impacted me. The fact that they haven't seen an Asian actually speak their mind or speak up, or you know, if a white CEO says it, he's like, wow, he's brave, he says it. But if like a Black woman says it, or if I say it, they're like problem and they're angry. That's some of the things that I've seen. We're in the land of Microsoft here. I'm near Redmond, Washington, and I've heard stories of casteism where people hold on to that from their homeland, and it carries over to their work environment here, where they're expected to really be overworked, never question anything, and they don't think that they can go to HR about it. And things like that are a problem here.
I see the problem surface in comments like, oh, well, Asians come to the US the right way, which really dismiss, all the immigrations issues that impact Asian communities as well. But in my career, I owe a lot of my progress to women, particularly women in color in the leadership position. Because I think that when you have a representation in the leadership position, like you, they think about your concerns. So we have shared issues, and we have shared experience, like we discussed today. But I also found that I really thrive much better in teams with a lot of diversity. And much like this panel discussion, I feel comfortable to show up as I am, as my full self. And that's why I think it's really important to have representation in every level.
Yeah, I agree, Ade. I think representation truly does matter. I know my career isn't as lengthy or varied as some of my colleagues here on the panel, but when I was first starting work out of college, there were no Filipino, let alone Asian faces within management. There was no one there to be sort of like a mentor or to guide you, or to even give representation to your thoughts and feelings on a matter. And as far as whether these obstacles, like the model minority myth, the perpetual foreigner myth, casteism, if they've impacted my personal career, I feel like it's always so challenging to say, because there are definitely instances of, small microaggressions at work, where people say, oh, wow, you just got to America, right? Or things like, oh, your English is really great. Or, wow, that's so Asian, which I don't even know what that means when people say that. But it's hard for me to point to instances where I think I know for sure it happened because I was Asian or because I was not white. For example, if a colleague gets a better raise than I do, or if they get a promotion faster than I do, or if people just treat them better than the way they would treat me, and they've also just met that person for the first time as well, it's always in the back of my mind, whether is race and culture at play here, or am I building it up? And I feel like it is, but again, it's always so hard for me to say whether or not that's the case. That's basically my experience with it.
I feel the same way, Will, and I think that is a burden that is exhausting to carry, to gauge whether or not we're being reviewed or being evaluated the same way as other team members.
I think you all bring up really good points around the insidious nature of what racism can actually look like playing out in the workplace. Oftentimes it's not even blatant. Sometimes it's just that everyone else on your team gets uplifted in a certain way and you're left out of that conversation. Sometimes it's, you never really know what it's going to be, and it's hard to put your finger on it all the time. But usually it is, one of these things kind of at play, whether you can name it or not. So I appreciate you all sharing your experiences on this.
I'm sorry, Claude, can I just add one more thing? I also want to express my thanks to my brother Sung, and I never tell him this as much, but just having another man that looks like me and has a similar lived experience to me is extremely helpful. Not just because we have camaraderie and experience, but because we can check our experiences together, and we can give feedback to each other without having to worry about, I gotta carefully navigate around, I don't want to offend, Sung. And so the purity of feedback that I think we can give each other is excellent. And I think making those spaces, kind of like this one, like we had talked earlier, like when we were practicing for this, we had to come up with an order of who was going to speak first. Whether it's just our personalities or cultural styles, it just doesn't happen a whole lot in business that there's these deafening silences because we're all comfortable with a more deferential conversation style. And so to have these spaces where you're finding out new things about each other and to be able to value it, and to know that experiences are going to be a little bit more similar are so valuable in places like this.
Yeah, absolutely. And for that sanity check too, just to make sure that someone else is seeing something the way you might be seeing it and your suspicion might be correct. It can be really valuable just feeling, again, I don't know, it's like that gut check. I guess for our last question here, I think that's, we're talking a lot about the work that we're doing, but how are we creating change in our work in our communities right now? I would really love to hear from you all about this.
Yeah, and again, if people were wondering why Chris is talking so much at the beginning and dominating the conversation, it's because we came up with an order. Like, it's my job to go first. Yeah. So how do you create change? I don't know, but I think for me, it's finding where you belong in addressing and disempowering systems of white supremacy, and that can look different for everybody. But because white supremacy is everywhere, there's certainly going to be places where you can look to disempower it. In my life and career, it's about finding different ways of listening to community, kind of like what I talked about earlier. It's important to not just make the space, but elevate it to a place where it's really important. And they're going to give you a look at a problem or a look at a dynamic in a way that is not traditionally valued, right? And not traditionally valued because of the way you look, the way you fit in, how much English you speak. And again, broadening, back to the first question, broadening the idea of what is American culture and what are we valuing, and the broader you're looking and the more inclusive you're being, and the more different underrepresented voices that you're elevating, I think you're going to come up with better products, better solutions, and a better culture in the workplace or in government. And for big governments like King County and for big companies like Esri, with diverse workforces, we need to be really intentional about making those spaces, and really be intentional about thinking about what we value and what we may not be paying attention to that could really improve the way we do business and the way that we serve people.
Yeah, for me, I try to participate in all the employee-led equity work groups to try to bring up concerns specific to our little communities. Jumping back to what Chris said at the end of the last question, I thank you, Chris, also for being an awesome team member, and having a colleague that's also an Asian male has been so just uplifting and empowering. It's one of the first times that I've actually had a counterpart and a partner in a work group that's Asian male. I attended a elementary school where I was the only Asian in the entire school, and it was just and I know that some of us out there you're the only Asian or diversity hire in your entire team, and how difficult that must feel. And many of us navigate that all the time. And in my current team, to have the privilege to work with Chris has been amazing, because usually when I speak up, people are like, what the hell is this? This guy's a troublemaker. Or is this guy a radical or social justice warrior? Is he angry? And then when Chris repeats, or we support each other, it becomes not just a single mind and just an angry guy complaining. It's well, maybe there is something to this, that multiple people are talking about this, right? So I try to participate as much as I can, and I know it's not our burden to teach white folks about the issues, but I try to, bring up concerns that impact us that are not necessarily seen or understood by our counterparts in management. The current work that we're doing, a little plug here for the art, the Coalition Against Hate and Bias is a different approach to how we create change in our communities. So our BIPOC communities don't make reports. They don't trust law enforcement. They're not calling them to make reports of hate crimes. And we are trying a different approach where we are partnering with these organizations that have deep relationships and trust with their individual communities. And they are serving them in different ways, whether it's healthcare, mental health, social services. And when they enter their doors, they're also able to make a report of a racial attack and a racially motivated crime. And we have seen tremendous success, something like 700% increase in the last year than our partner agencies have been able to gather, which goes to prove how important relationship and trust is. And we use those opportunities to then teach our own communities around our anti-Blackness, Native erasure, things that are kind of programmed into us over generations of media and what they want us to know and hide from us, right? The white supremacist culture that make us say we hate one another and hate a different group. So now we are working on healing. How do we heal from the intergenerational trauma? How do we, as we learn more about the historical context, policies that have gotten to where we are today, the legacies of those policies still exist, and people don't even know why. So we're teaching our communities about that, and our own communities, racism and discrimination and bias. And that has been helping us to bridge between racial ethnic groups and kind of open that dialogue, and being able to see the humanity in each other's groups. It's really been tremendous in healing and connecting us, and just like connecting all of our communities together. So I'm really excited to continue that and support that work.
I love hearing that you include healing as part of your program, and I'm really excited to hear all the great work that you all are doing up in King County. As for me, I think the one thing that I'm still trying to do to create change in my work and communities is the first thing I'm doing is I no longer hiding my intersectional identities. I think it's important to just kind of, break out from the mold that we were kind of given to blend in and to just show up as ourselves. So I'm working on that. And at work, very slowly and shakily, I work on DEI efforts, starting with just creating a space for discussion and really trying to focus and be mindful that the work that I'm doing is supporting, DEI efforts and the BIPOC team members. And not so much of like trying to, like you mentioned, teach folks about the social justice issues that are impacting us, and also supporting and seeking mentorship from team members that are like me. I push for, also because I'm in design, I also try to push for doing more research and make sure that different voices are included in the research data and addressed in the design of the product. In my community, I work with a local organization that mentors BIPOC college students and recent grads with job readiness, whether it's resume writing, interview prep, or just navigating the workspace. There's also an element of financial stability and wealth building and negotiating for salaries in that space. And last year, as a personal, but also as part of like a community project, I started a research project around where I look into like using library as a community hub and how it relates to public transit, and look for opportunities to provide library card holders, free transit access. I learned that in Multnomah County, where I live, the library system has a lot of services that would benefit the community, much like computer and Wi-Fi access at the library, which helps people when they are job searching, or students when they're doing their research and homework. I think learning that broadband access is not accessible for everyone. That's part of the part of what I surface. But currently, these services that are available at the libraries aren't distributed equally in areas where the community needs them the most. And the large reasoning, or part of the reasoning for that, is there's not an easy transit access to get the community to the library locations. So I'm hoping to continue this research project and create partnership with local organizations that hopefully in the future provide better transit access, but also, free transit access, specifically in relation to library services.
Wow, I feel really inspired after hearing everyone's work that they do in their communities. I feel like I need to find my own passion projects as well. For the change that I do within my day-to-day work, it's a little bit different because I work in tech support, so there's not really a lot of room for DEI efforts. However, like Ade said, though, trying to break the mold at work, me personally, I'm a very shy person, but I try to not let things like these various microaggression comments just slip. And I think that's one thing that, regardless of what field you're in or what you're doing, that's something that you can do, is trying to break that mold, sticking up for yourself and letting people know that it's not okay to make these types of comments, because those small comments, like I mentioned before, down the line translate into bigger, more impactful things on your career, if that's what people are saying to you, to your face. For my non-day-to-day work, though, like I mentioned before, I am one of the co-chairs for the Asian Desi and Pacific Islander Employee Resource Group here at Esri. we wanted to start it because, well, I started chatting with people on Teams, which is what we use to speak internally with each other at Esri. Because when I first started working at Esri, I started at the DC regional office, and I noticed there were not a lot of Asian faces. So I started messaging other Asian people that I had met during onboarding and trying to link us all together to form a sort of group. And eventually, Chloe and a couple other colleagues that are no longer here at Esri with us, we all got together and started forming these little meetings to see what we could do. And what we try to do is make space for people to be able to speak about topics that are relevant to our community, to network, and to also have professional developments events. For example, late last year, we had an event titled Breaking the Ceiling, and it was targeted for people who may come from a marginalized community, so not just the ADPI community, but all marginalized communities, and how you can work towards identifying that we all have these ceilings and obstacles, and tools that you can use to help better yourself when you are speaking with your management, or when you are up for raises, or when you're speaking and communicating with your team members. And perhaps there are communication styles that are different, and maybe you need to work over that. So that's sort of what we do within our employee resource group.
I think that was a really great overview. And yeah, much like Will, it's very inspiring to hear what everyone is working on. I know at Esri, we do work on the racial equity team and within our employee resource group communities. But, there's, even if you have just an hour a week to dedicate toward bettering your community, it's always worth that investment. It's always worth going that extra mile and just seeing where those needs are. So yeah, that was really awesome. Hearing from you all was great. So in this last portion here, following that question, we have some time for live Q&A. So I will pass this off to Will, who has been monitoring that during this conversation.
Alrighty, let's read some of our questions. If you've seen me looking away from the camera, that's why. I've been trying to look through it all. So our top voted question, or most upvoted question, is, what are your perspectives on the challenges of the past year on the Asian Desi Pacific Islander communities, and how can GIS help to illustrate their stories? So that whoever wants to take a stab at it, go ahead.
We didn't practice who goes first during Q&A, but I'll try. That's a cool question, and I think that's one of the reasons why Sung and I are here. It's because we started using Survey 123 to administer this hate and bias survey in communities to figure out, what's going on beneath the level of hate crimes, right? Because in the United States, it is not against the law to be a racist, right? You can call me a chink in the middle of the street. Police can't do anything. That's free speech. So what's being done to track that? And that's where the Coalition Against Hate and Bias comes in, to talk with communities, to understand what's happening at a level that law enforcement is not tracking, but is still, really causing harm and violence to our sense of being and who we are and how we fit into this country. I think the way it can be really helpful, especially for the Asian communities, is let's take a look at this data and realize that, hey, all of a sudden, we're being treated almost exactly the same way as so many other of our Black and brown siblings have been treated for centuries. And we've been treated the same way too, right? But it's going to break that myth that we fit in from the first place. And I think that's maybe a long-term effect of what the data is going to show. Sung, did you have anything to add to the work?
These stories that we're gathering, they're like gut wrenching. They get me enraged, and some of these stories that I read of these hate crime reports is that a common theme is that, oh, I've been called that my entire life, or people have been doing this to me my entire life, and these elders that have been treated this way, they just go on as that's like normal, and we are trying to tell them that that's not okay, and you don't have to take that, and this is not normal, and here's why this is bad, So that's been really difficult. And we are trying to see how we are respectful of these sacred stories while also trying to leverage them to tell a story to the general audience, to the public, about the things that are happening, that the community is hurting, and at a really high rate that may be invisible to mainstream folks. And like, how do we, make that data more accessible versus like just data points or like a really big Excel spreadsheet, so that people can kind of get a better understanding and picture of that. And the hope is that once they understand that they are in support of some changes and educating their own communities.
And I think connecting those experiences into one cohesive story about what is really going on in our communities is a really important key part of what you all are doing, because I saw comments on news stories that that were very public when these hate incidents first started happening, and the responses were, just because like one person experienced this doesn't mean it's a widespread issue. It's no big deal. I mean, I had a friend whose her dumpling shop was completely destroyed in March of last year, and it was not considered a hate crime because there was no big picture of like how many data points there really are. So definitely appreciate the work you all are doing. It's very pertinent to this question, I would say.
We did a recorded seminar if you guys want to watch it. I don't have the link for it, but if you search for us, you can learn more about the coalition's work.
Yeah, if you are able to scan this QR code in my background there, that'll take you to our program information. And this artwork was created by a community member, Matt Ekoha Hayashi, with feedback and collaboration from the coalition. And the message is written in Lashutsi, which is used by the Coast Salish people here. And it says, in our community, what affects all affects one affects all.
Awesome, thank you.
All right, I think we can go on to the next question, unless Adi had anything to say, but feel free to interrupt me if otherwise. And yes, someone else asked, I'm going to go to another question, but someone asked in the chat if this will be recorded. Yes, this will be recorded. And you should be able to find it later on after it's edited and all that. The second most upvoted question is, how did GIS help you to where you are now as a GIS professional, and especially as an ADPI person? I think I know I read the question, but I'd like to chime in a little bit. For how GIS helped me, it actually helped my personal life a lot. I was working a lot of dead-end receptionist jobs, and I needed to go back to school for something. And I was always in love with maps and geography. And so I figured I needed a hard set of skills, right? And so GIS was that. Those were the skills that I wanted to learn, and now I'm able to use that in a professional setting. And as far as GIS helping me, particularly as an ADPI professional, it at least helped me move to an industry that is more diverse compared to where I was before, especially a lot more tolerant and welcoming than compared to where I was before. And that's something that I really appreciate. But if anyone has any other perspectives, please chime in.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Ade.
Well, for my transit project last year, if it wasn't because of my exposure to GIS through my work at Esri, I wouldn't be able to extract data that all the transit agencies, the local transit agencies in Portland have, that shows where all of the connections for all the buses and trains, and then compare that with the library GIS data that highlights community of opportunities where there are missing connections. And then when I combine the three maps, I was able to see where the missing connections are in terms of how the communities are being left behind in terms of not being able to access libraries, and why that is in relation to transit access.
For me, it's been tremendous. Like, I touched on this before, but you know, before this program and how we're collecting this data, you would, if you ask some local law enforcement agencies and people, they would say there is no hate crime, there's no problems. And to be able to get this data and the stories, really personal stories from the community where it's happening, and to see this tremendous amount of data, we all knew it, but now it validates it for the policymakers to say, holy crap, you're right, it is happening. At how much percentage, how many incidents? And it kind of forces them to rethink their policy decisions and resource allocations. So it has been amazing. It has been an amazing tool to for us to leverage that data and stories. And actually, we've been trying to work with Esri on how do we even strengthen this. You know, amazing person from Esri, Clinton, he's been working with us to, you know, how do we pull in other data sets that are related? Like, is there BIPOC businesses in the area? Are there is there BIPOC neighborhoods, and does that correlate to, you know, public safety in that area, or public good relationships and community building in those areas, and like be able to have some predictive analytics around, hey, maybe you're more safe here if you are a Asian person, and there's so many possibilities that we are just teasing, and we'd love to just dig more deeper into that, and we're really excited about that.
Unfortunately, that is all the time we have for the Q&A, but really appreciate all of your thoughtful responses. If you have further Q&A questions, please feel free to connect with presenters on LinkedIn, or to look at their info, their profiles on the UC pages, because we're happy to correspond with you. And we just want to thank you all for joining. Really, please feel free to talk to us further if you would like to. There's a lot of really exciting work going on. And we want to remind everyone as well, before we have to sign off here, that North Star is hosting an event for Blacks in GIS. It's their final event in their homecoming series. So please try to join that at 3:30 Pacific. And don't forget to check out these other SIG recordings. But yeah, we really appreciate you all joining us today, and thank you for your time.